Okay. Hi guys. So I think I'm live. My name's Tyrelle Hunt. Let me know. We'll get started in a couple minutes. It's a little bit early, so we're supposed to start at 5, so I'm just going to wait a couple more minutes until everyone's here. Okay, guys. Since we're already kind of getting some questions, I'm going to start. Some of the questions, I'm going to address all questions at the end of the session. I'm just kind of going to speak to my experience and my story first to give you kind of a picture of what Saba is like and what the process is like. And then from there, I'll answer some questions at the end. The ones that I can't answer, some of the questions I'll have to direct to the Saba admissions staff because they'll better know the answers. I don't know the answers to all of these questions. So I'll just start by talking about myself, my story, give you guys information, and then we'll get to the questions later. So to start off, I'm going to just talk first about sort of my pre-Saba story, a little bit how I ended up at Saba, and my backstory. So again, my name's Tyrelle Hunt. I'm a recent Saba graduate and recently matched Saba student. I'm originally from Canada, so I'm Canadian, and I'm from Toronto, Ontario. I did my undergraduate degree at the University of Toronto. I did it in life sciences with a double major in human biology and immunology, which I graduated from in 2010. Then after that, I kind of took a roundabout way to med school. I didn't go or consider med school immediately. I actually worked for a bit after my undergrad as a marketing coordinator. And then I decided at that time to go back and do a master's degree in the management of science and technology. So that was also at the University of Toronto. It was a combination degree that was offered by the Faculty of Medicine there, as well as the Rotman School of Management. So it takes people from like their business, from science backgrounds and tries to teach them sort of business management principles so they can kind of combine those two expertise. And from there, I actually did an internship at Mars Innovation in Toronto, which is like a think tank and a research hub, where they kind of connect science and intellectual property and tech to the business resources that they need to kind of commercialize that. So I worked for a company under them. And then I went on to be a consultant. And it was at that time that I was like, I really want to do med school. That's always been my goal. But I know that a lot of Canadians can relate to this experience in that it's very difficult to get into a Canadian medical school. So I had been discouraged sort of along the way about whether to actually apply. At that time, I did apply to Canadian medical schools, but didn't get in. And I was older at the time. So I remember talking to my boss and she was sort of my mentor. And she was like, I think you really need to just pursue what your options are. And if you have to go abroad, you have to go abroad because I think this is what you really need to do. So that's when I started investigating the Caribbean schools. As you know, there's several options. And I heard about Saba actually at the time because I had two friends that were from the Toronto area that were already going through the process at Saba. So I started talking to them, kind of asking them questions, picking their brain about the school, what they thought about it. And it seemed to be the right fit for me at that time. So a couple of the reasons that I eventually decided to apply to Saba and what made me choose it was that it was affordable. Which is very important for Canadian international students, just because of the reality for us getting loans can be more difficult. And also we don't get as big a loan often in Canada. So as a result of that, budget-wise, you have to consider a school that fits for what you can afford. And Saba was perfect for that. And then in addition to that, I liked that it had smaller classes and smaller sizes. I didn't want to get sort of lost in this fray of students. And then I had heard feedback about other schools that the volume of students sometimes created a hindrance, particularly when they got to the clinical side of things. So for those reasons, I decided to go to Saba, and I started in September of 2015. So the next part of the journey that I've been asked to sort of give my experience was on the island and the basic sciences curriculum down there. So my basic sciences experience, I'm going to be honest, I'm a city girl. I'm from Toronto. I'm urban. I like being in a big city. So when I first got to the island, it was a huge culture shock for me, just because it's going from big city life to a very sort of smaller town feel, very small. And it can be a bit isolating because, you're on this island. So for me at first, it was like, where have I ended up? I didn't have my usual hey, I can go check out all these new restaurants or go to the coffee shop or that kind of thing. But I knew I was there for a particular goal. So I kind of made that my focus. And then in addition to that, the longer I was there, you make some really great friends. And so then it made adjusting to the experience a lot easier for me. You get to know the professors. And then I got involved in some of the things on the island. I volunteered for the animal foundation on the island. And I actually ended up adopting a dog from there who's still with me and has been with me from my time on Saba all the way through rotations and is now currently a princess in a condo in Toronto. So eventually you kind of adjust to the island life and you get more accustomed to it. And for me, then I was fine. And I just continued to focus on what my main goal was, which was to finish med school and get my degree. So what I will say about classes, it's a lot of information. And they're going to tell you this when you start in first semester, that it's like learning through a fire hose, that you're going to get tons of information all at once, right up front, and in a short amount of time. And this is very true. What I can say about that is, for example, when I was doing my undergraduate degree at the University of Toronto, I took anatomy, and anatomy there was taught in an 8 to 9 month period. On Saba, we learned all the same amount of anatomy in 3 months in first semester. So you guys do really have to be prepared for the fact that you're going to get a ton of information right up front, and you have to be prepared for that. My advice there is you've got to learn it as it comes, and you've got to stay on top of it. Because if you fall behind, it gets very difficult for you to catch up. So for me, what I would do, and I'm a very scheduled, sort of organized person. So for me, I would set my weekly schedule, my daily schedule. I'd set my goals for myself for the week, for the day, and I'd really do everything I could to stick to that. It's really important that you create those schedules, that you stick to those study plans so that you don't fall behind. And if you are struggling, be sure to reach out for help, because other students can give you resources or work with you. The TAs can be helpful. And then there are some really great professors that can also be helpful. But the biggest thing is create those study plans and stick to them. The other thing I can recommend that you do when you're down there is you really do need to take breaks. It can be really stressful, and everyone around you is going to be stressed out and anxious and worrying about step one and this and that. And all throughout med school, you're going to experience that. So it's really important that you learn early and create habits early that allow you to kind of take time out for yourself. Even if you literally have to schedule it into your planner and hold yourself accountable to doing that, it's really important that you do. As far as classes go, some of my favorites or some of the great professors that I had when I was down there and people to look out for those of you who've already been accepted and are going to be starting in May or September. My suggestion, there's some really great profs. Dr. Robson is fantastic. She teaches infectious disease and response, and you'll have her in second semester. You will remember what she's taught you for years to come. And she is a great resource to have and friend to have on Saba and will be throughout the process. My other absolute favorite is Dr. Young. Dr. Young actually started at the same time as us, or same time as me. His first class that he was teaching was our class in September 2015. And he is probably to this day one of the best teachers that I've ever had. And I'm super grateful to have had the experience to be taught by Dr. Young. So if you guys have that pleasure, you'll be very excited as well. I love Dr. Banez down there too. Dr. Banez is originally from Toronto too. So it was great being able to talk to him about some of our Toronto teams because he knew them all. And so you kind of feel like you have a little bit of piece of home with you when you're so far away from it. And Dr. Tom, who you'll have right away, teaching you in anatomy. He loves to teach and he's very helpful. Anything you need for anatomy. And I do recommend for anatomy really going to the lab and going to the lab outside of your actual class and allotted time, because that's really truly where those fundamental principles of anatomy stuck with me. And then finally, Dr. Pinlack, I can't say it enough for clinical skills. She's phenomenal. She's who I'd seek out in clinical skills all the time because she was such a great teacher in the clinical skills side of things and on the physical exams. She's very thorough. She teaches you the techniques very well. And if you pay attention and you use her skills, you'll be perfect when you go on to rotation because she's the absolute best for that. So the other big monster that comes out of the basic sciences, and it'll be consuming your life for quite some time, is step one. So step one is something that I know everyone stresses out about and has tons of questions about, and like what to do. My advice is just please don't overthink this. You're going to hear a lot about it and you're going to be like, should I be doing this? Should I be doing that? And my advice to you is just pick resources that work for you. So throughout your semesters on the island, it's enough prep. What you learn down there on the island and the prep that you do in each individual course is enough to prepare you for what you need to know for step one. So what I always recommend is just learn everything right the first time because it makes it much easier to go back to and sort of refresh your memory and refresh yourself when you're hitting that semester 5 and when you're hitting that step 1 exam. So if you learn it right the first time and you're really thorough the first time, it makes it so much easier later on. The other thing I recommend is really pick resources that work for you and stick with them. There's a lot of resources that'll be available for you to use. Like I'm sure a lot of you have already heard of first aid, but then there's doctors in training and there's Kaplan. There's the Robbins textbook for pathology. There's so many different resources out there. And some will work very well for you, some won't. My recommendation is I had ones that worked very well for me and I stuck with them. That's what I used. I used it when I was studying for the material in the class and I used it when I went back to refresh my memory and study for my step 1 exam. So pick those resources early, stick with them and use them well. The other advice I have for step 1 is UWorld. Practice questions are essential to being successful on the step 1 exam. For me, I wish I had started doing UWorld questions a lot sooner and a lot earlier than I did so that I could go through them multiple more times before I actually wrote the exam. So my recommendation is as soon as you can start using UWorld, do it and do it as many times as you can. It's fantastic and perfect prep for your step 1 exam. So that kind of takes you through my experience on the island, through the basic sciences, through step 1. Then you're going to transition more into the clinical component of the program and the curriculum. And so this is where you're going to start your clinical rotations, your cores, your electives. So third year is all of your core rotations. And I will say that the school was really excellent about scheduling those all up front and getting you ready for those. So as soon as you're ready to start clinicals, you'll get your full schedule from the school and you'll be scheduled for all of your cores right at the same time. So you'll know exactly what your third year is going to look like from the get-go, which I was really, really happy about because there's a lot of uncertainty. You're like, oh my God, where am I going to go? So like, this is perfect. You'll know for the next year where you're going to be and when. So there's lots of support through that. They do a meeting with you before you leave the island, asking you about like your interests and things like that. You'll also get sort of a preference form. I do suggest that you really do be honest on that about what your interests are for rotations, like whether you are really interested in doing internal medicine or if surgery is a big interest to you, because the school does take that into account and they do really try to schedule you at locations that are very strong in providing an education to that specific specialty. So, you know, for me, primary care was my goal from the beginning, family medicine, internal medicine. medicine, and knowing that I was scheduled at a place where the internal medicine clinical rotation was fantastic learning, and was really, really good for that. And I know people who had more of an interest in surgery got to do their rotations at places where, surgery was a huge component and a really good learning experience. So do make your wants and needs and desires for your future career goals known to your clinical deans, because then they can really make sure that you get those core rotations where you want them to be. Then you're going to move sort of into your fourth year once you finish all of your core rotations. And then you're going to move more into the elective component of the program in your fourth year. So for elective rotations, you basically are kind of the director of that and choosing what you want to do. And so for this, the best advice that I can give you for scheduling electives is reach out to your fellow Saba students. So they are a great resource, like students that are ahead of you, or students that are maybe a couple semesters ahead of you, or graduates like myself or other residents. Like when you're on your core rotations, you're going to meet us. You'll rotate with some of us on some of those rotations. And so ask us questions about where we went, what electives we did, what sites we liked, what sites maybe we didn't like, that kind of thing, because we're a great resource for that. So for when you're going to schedule your electives, ask your fellow Saba students and grads about what is available and get that information. It's really important that you do that early, because then you'll kind of get an idea and a feel of what you want to do. And electives, they can fill up fast, or sites can want to schedule sort of like a year in advance or months in advance. So asking your fellow Saba students and fellow Saba graduates those questions is really important, because we'll be able to direct you on that and give you information on what exactly to do. But my other advice is to start doing that early, because then you'll be able to schedule them pretty easily. And then for me, I did it early, and then I knew exactly what my fourth year was going to look like before it even started, which was wonderful, because again, then I knew exactly where I was going to be going, what I was going to be doing for that last year of medical school. And I know with everything else that causes stress for people through this process, that's really nice to have. So that was sort of the clinical rotation experience. I loved all of my rotations. I had really great rotations. I learned so much through them. And I really, really liked them. And on my electives, the other thing I will say, or even in cores, it's really important that you be present during that time, because you really do get to learn a lot. And the more that you're there and the more that you're participating in those clinical rotations, the more, one, you're going to learn and take away from them. But in addition to that, you're going to form some really big and solid relationships with people that will really matter when you go through the match process. So for me, like I had a family med elective rotation, and I loved it, and I had such a great time, and I made such good connections and relationships with the residents and the professors and the faculty there, that when it came time to match season, when I was going through the interview process, like they already knew they were going to interview me, and they loved me, and it felt more like kind of a conversation when I got there rather than that like interview, because they already knew who I was. And knew that I was a candidate that they would love to have in their program. So those rotations are a chance for you to do that early on, and sort of make that match and interview process a lot easier for you. So then we come to the big one, the match, which I know is what everybody always gets worried about, because that's what ultimately we're all working towards. We all want to get there, match, and have a job, right? And so I know that because that's what we're all working towards, and it's our we made it moment, a lot of people want to know about what our experience is like in that process, and what advice we can give to you guys as future Saba students, or Saba students already who are, sort of behind in the process here. So what I'm going to do for this is kind of just give you my experience with the match process. And then I'm also going to just answer some of the questions that I know I had going into it. And hopefully you'll find it a bit helpful. So the first thing I'm going to do is just answer some of those specific questions, and then I'll kind of give my general experience and sort of the advice that I have for you guys going through the match process. So the first was, how many programs do you apply to? This was a question that I had. It's a question that I hear a lot from students that are coming up to that match time. And so the simple answer that I got, and the simple answer I'll give to you guys, is as many as you can afford to apply to, because each application will cost you money. So you do have to budget through the match process and be aware of that. But the simple answer to that question is apply as broadly into as many programs as you can. But then I also heard, as I was kind of going on interviews and talking to previous residents who had matched, a lot of them had wished that maybe they had done a bit more research prior to applying, because it would have saved them some money at the time, and that they could have been a bit more selective in their programs. So there is a tool that I used a lot, which I found very helpful for this, which was called Residency Explorer, and it's offered by the AAMC and ERAS. It's a great resource because you put in your profile information, so your scores, things like that, and then it'll kind of tell you where you match up against candidates who've already matched into that program. And for international medical graduates, it also gives you a percentage of matched international medical graduates into that program. And so Residency Explorer was very helpful for me because it could tell me which programs were probably worth my time for applying to. And that's something that I recommend you kind of do as you're getting prepped with your ERAS application and looking to submit that stuff. So from there, of course, again, for how many programs to apply to, it's really going to be based on you as an individual. Obviously, the stronger you are as an applicant and the stronger your application is, the fewer programs you could apply to, because the more likely you are to get interviews from many programs. But for those of you that like specific numbers, 150 to 200 applications is good. But again, it's as many as you can. The other question that I got a lot was like, how many interviews do I go on? So interview requests will start coming in and you're starting to wonder, like, do I accept them all? Do I go to them all? What do I do? And again, the simple answer to that question is go to as many as you want to, or as many as you can afford to go to. But again, this is going to be very dependent upon you as an individual applicant and your experience as you go through the process. What I can tell you about the interview process is it's very exhausting. It's very tiring. In the beginning, you'll be really excited and you'll have that adrenaline and you'll be like ready to go. But after doing a few of them, it gets really tiring because you have dinners the night before, you have all day interviews, and then sometimes you even have events the day after. So it can be like a 3-day thing. You're talking the whole time, you're on the whole time, you're traveling. So it gets really exhausting and you will get tired. So as much as you probably want to go to all of your interviews, sometimes that may not be the case. So based on my personal experience and what I felt, was I got interviews and they come in piecemeal. So they'll come in kind of one at a time because programs process applications at different rates. So I scheduled all the interviews that I got right up front, and I scheduled ones for programs that I really, really liked and was really interested in earlier on in the process, and ones that I was like, I don't know if I'm going to like this program. I don't really know if this is one that I want to go to. I would schedule those interviews later so that I had some flexibility around them. So I went through that process. I started going to my interviews and I started to see kind of how they were going, how I was feeling about them. And I got about halfway through all of my interviews when I felt very confident about those interviews and I felt very confident about programs. And I kind of knew what my top choices were going to be and where I really wanted to go. And then I started looking at the future interviews that I had scheduled, and I felt like these are programs that I'm going to probably rank low anyway, so I decided to cancel future interviews. So again, this is going to be based on your individual experience as you go through the process. Go to as many interviews as you can, go to as many interviews as you want. But if you start to feel like, I'm in a good place, I've gone to enough interviews and I feel very strongly about these programs and I'm getting tired, or I don't have the money to do another 3 or 4, that's okay. Feel okay to cancel. So that was kind of the interview process and some of the specific questions I know that I had going into it and that I know other students have had and asked me. But now for my just general experience through the match process, my advice to you is you're going to feel very stressed going into it. Like, oh my gosh, I have to go on these interviews and I really have to sell myself as a candidate. Like, you need to pick me, you need to pick me. And there's a lot of pressure and a lot of stress. My biggest advice that I learned going through the process was this really is a process about finding the best fit for you and the best fit for the program. If they're interviewing you, they already think that you are a great candidate and they already want you. The programs spend a lot of time and a lot of resources on interviews, so they're not going to interview candidates that they don't think should be there. So knowing that, the match process is really a process that's about you getting to know the program better and the program getting to know you better so that you guys know it's a good fit. And the best advice I got was actually from the program that I matched into, which is Henry Ford Family Med's program. And I sat down for the interview and it was the program director and one of their faculty interviews. And they told me that right off the bat. They were like, look, if you're here and we're interviewing you, we already want you. We already think you are great and that you should be here. So now it's just for us to get to know you a little better and vice versa. So relax and just enjoy this time. And so that's what I'm going to tell you about the interview process is just relax and enjoy it. Enjoy it and pay attention and be present in it, because that's when you're going to really find out what program is best for you, and you're going to really be able to determine where you should go. And so that's how I applied that was my rationale through the process, is to just enjoy it. And I actually had a very good time. My mom came with me on some of the interviews, and we got to explore some of the different states and try different restaurants and breweries and things like that. And it was a lot of fun. And then the other thing I heard a lot from current residents as I was going through rotations, and then it also became very clear to me as I was going through the interview process, is truly like trust your gut. You're going to go on interviews, you're going to go places, and you're going to have that feeling like, man, like I really fit here. Like this is really good. I love this program. I know I'd love to come here. And then you're going to go on other ones and be like, this is a great program. They have a lot to offer, but I don't know if it's for me. So pay attention to those feelings, because they do mean a lot. And so kind of trust your gut as you're going through it, because you're going to get a ton of information from the programs and it can get overwhelming. The other thing that I did that helped me in the end when I went to do my rank order list was after each interview, I sat down and I wrote some notes about what I liked about a program and what I didn't like about a program. And then also, what were my first impressions? What did I feel when I was there? And so that's kind of how I did it. And I had those notes to go back to when I wanted to look over my rank order list, because I'll tell you, you're going to go on a bunch of interviews. They're going to be spread out over a long period of time. My first interviews were in October, and you submit your rank list in February. There's going to be a lot you don't remember from that first interview. So for me, it was nice to have those notes to go back and be able to say, okay, so that's kind of what I was thinking when I was there, or okay, that's what I really liked or didn't like. And it helps form that list in February when you go to submit it. So that's kind of my advice there. Enjoy the process, trust your gut. They already want you if you're on the interview, so just relax, be yourself, get to know them, let them get to know you, and take some notes that you can go back to later when you're forming that list. So then finally, it's time to make that list. It's time to choose a program. For me, I matched into my first choice program, which was Henry Ford in family medicine. I only applied to family medicine programs. From day one when I started at Saba, I wanted to be a family physician. That was always my goal. And so I only applied to family med programs in the US match. Henry Ford was my first choice program. And the reasons for that were when I was there, the interview day, I had just such a great experience on my interview day. It was a really positive experience. I had lots of fun. I felt really comfortable there. I left feeling like I totally fit into this place and into this program. I love the faculty, the program director, me and the residents get along great. So it was just all around just such a great experience that it was very memorable. It actually was my first interview, and I always kept coming back to it every day, every time I went on another interview. So I knew that it really connected with me that way. In addition to that, location was important for me. As I said way back before, I'm a city girl. I love the urban environments. And so I did kind of want to go to a more urban focused program. And Henry Ford is located in Detroit, which is a big city, and has access to sort of that urban patient population, which is what I wanted. And then it matched really well with my career goals. So for me, the main focus for me in my career moving forward as a physician is actually the healthcare needs and the healthcare of the LGBTQ community. It's a very personal thing for me. I love it. It's what I want to do, and I want it to be the focus of my practice moving forward. I think it's really important that primary care physicians provide access to this community to quality healthcare and safe healthcare. And so that was sort of my goal. And I knew that from the beginning. And then more specifically, I really want to do transgender medicine, and I want to be able to manage that sort of group of patients. So for me, Henry Ford was the top program for that opportunity. They have a lot of providers on staff that's their focus of care is the LGBTQ community and transgender patients. And one of their core faculty reached out to me, and we had a long conversation about, what her day-to-day looks like, her interactions with these patients, what the opportunities would be for me as a resident. Would she be able to mentor me, and how would she do that? And all of those kinds of things. And it was a great conversation, and it became clear to me that my goals in focusing on this kind of care were also Henry Ford's goals, and that they were excited to have a potential resident that was their focus. And then for me, it meant that I'd have a lot of learning opportunities to focus on that and build out that part of my practice moving forward. So that's kind of why I chose Henry Ford. And that sort of brings me to where I am today, and I'm pretty excited. to get started in July. So that's everything. And now I'll open it up to questions that you guys may have about anything that I said, or specific questions about the process. So for the questions that are here, which is what is the procedure for international students to get in, I'm going to leave that up to the admissions staff because I'm not exactly sure all of it. I know for me, I filled out an application. There was an interview. You have to meet a bunch of certain requirements in regards to that. But being a Canadian, I was basically an international student. So on the website, I'm pretty sure there's quite a bit of information on how to apply, but I'll leave that to the admissions staff for how to do. And are there any scholarships available? There weren't at the time that I was there. But maybe now. So again, I'll leave that to the admissions staff to answer if there's any scholarships available to you guys. And will they do online classes for the 2020 semester? That I cannot speak to. So I'll also leave that for some of the admissions staff to answer for you guys. Any more questions? Okay, it doesn't seem like there's any more questions. So if your guys are okay, I'm going to head off. I hope some of this information was helpful. Some of the advice was helpful. Again, if you have other questions in regards to some of the admission stuff, you can reach out to the admission staff. They'll be more than happy to help you. And down the road, if you are at Saba and you see me on a rotation, feel free to reach out and let me know. Hold on. Looks like there is a question here. Did you apply to Canada? I did apply to Canada. I did apply to Canada at first. That was what I did first. I applied once. I didn't get in Canada. It's just very competitive, and the experiences that the experience that I had with applying to Canada and what I heard from other people who had done it was that they got in on like the 4th try or the 5th try. And for me, I was already in my late 20s. I didn't want to wait anymore. So I decided to go abroad to do it instead of coming back to Canada. And if you're talking about the Canadian match, did I apply to the Canadian match? I didn't. I thought about it because I am Canadian, so I considered coming back to Canada. And what I will say is actually Saba has a pretty good success rate with their Saba graduates matching in Canada, but I didn't actually apply to the Canadian match. I decided to do the US only, but that was just my personal preference. I know quite a few friends of mine did actually apply to the Canadian match, and 2 of my very good friends are both matched to Canadian residencies. And they both went to Saba. So I think some more questions are coming through, so I'm just going to hold on here. Okay, so joined a little late. I probably missed if you mentioned something about basic sciences. Do you take 30 credit hours per semester? So 30 credit hours per semester, I don't know how it'll translate into credit hours. Essentially, what you have on the basic sciences side of things is in first semester, you have 3 classes. You have anatomy, is cell tissue and structure and function. It's basically a histology class, and then you have your clinical skills class. What you can expect as far as class time, it's full days. On the island, it's pretty much 8 to 5, 8 to 4, 8 to 3, somewhere in that range, every single day, Monday to Friday. So it is a lot of class. It's full-time class. And again, as I said, you're getting a lot of information coming at you. So if 30 credit hours is kind of like a full term, a full course load, then absolutely yes. And again, it's a lot of information. So for me, like I said, I went to the University of Toronto in my undergrad. I did an anatomy course. And so it was a full year course. So technically it ran from like September through till June. I covered all of the same amount of material in that anatomy course as I did in the 3 months of first semester on Saba. So you can expect a very high course load. The next question is, I'm trying to become a family medicine doctor that works in Georgia. Do you recommend I apply for matches outside Georgia? Absolutely. As an international medical graduate, we do have some extra obstacles to overcome. And so I suggest that you apply very broadly. For me, when I applied to the match, I applied to 150 programs. And I applied all over the United States. There were not everywhere. There were some places that I knew I didn't want to move all the way over to the West Coast. And when I was doing some research on programs, there were certain states that weren't as IMG friendly, if you would say. So I kind of did my research on what programs I knew were IMG friendly, and that's where I would apply. But if you're looking to be a family medicine doctor in Georgia, apply to the Georgia programs for sure, but then also apply outside of that too. So did you choose to take a year off following school, or is it typical to match 5 years after matriculation? So I actually took a year. So sometimes when it happens on Saba, is you can be what they call off cycle. So just because of after you finish on the island and you go back and you write your step 1, there's an RLRA project that you also have to complete. So that kind of counts as a semester of work, and then you start on clinical rotations. So for me, what happened is I kind of was a bit off cycle. You have about a 6-week window when you start in September to match into like a 20. So for me, it was September 2015 to match in 2019. I totally could have. But it would have meant that I would have had to really schedule my electives back to back to back. I would have had to do all of my exams back to back to back. And for me, I just chose not to do it that way. I chose to take my time in finishing my electives, and then I graduated in September and had time off before I matched into 2020. And I just chose to do it that way because I figured I would perform better on my exams, and there was no downside to it. So that's the answer to that question. It's not typical to match 5 years after matriculation. It kind of also depends on when you start in the progress. Like if you're in May or the January start, it's a bit of a different cycle. So most of the time you'll go in and match into the year that matches with when you started. Did I apply to Canada? I think I answered this. I didn't apply to the Canadian match, but I did apply to Canadian med schools, chose to then go abroad. I didn't apply to the Canadian match. Most of the people that I know that did apply to the Canadian match didn't apply for IM. They applied for family medicine. But everyone that I know who chose to apply to the Canadian match this year for family medicine matched from Saba. So if you're interested in that, it's definitely a possibility. And how do you plan in getting back to Canada and practicing family medicine there? So I'm open to practicing medicine back in Canada or in the States. I haven't really made a decision where I'm going to stay yet, but I do know that I want to keep Canada as an option and as I move forward in my career. How do I plan on doing that? So there's 2 ways in which you can do that. Now there's a pathway, which basically if you do your family medicine residency in the States, they recognize it. So you just have to come back and be supervised for a year in Canada, which from my understanding right now is actually pretty easy to do. There's a lot of family medicine doctors that are looking to retire and stuff in family medicine in Canada. So you can come back and kind of work with them in their practice, and they'll supervise you for that year, and then you can take it over. So that's one pathway back to Canada. The other path back to Canada is you write the exams. So you write the QE Part 1 and the QE Part 2. And then the certification from the College of Family Physicians exam. So it's 3 exams. You can write those. And then if you write those and pass them all and you finish your residency in the States, you can immediately come back and practice independently in Canada. So for me, I'm probably going to write the exams. I have to write step 3. I have to write the American board exams. They're all equivalent to the Canadian exams. So if you're studying for them, you're studying for your Canadian exams. So my plan is to write those in the same time frame. And then that will allow me to come back to Canada after residency if that's what I choose to do. And when I was on rotations, there was a lot of Saba residents, like Saba graduates that were now residents that are Canadian. And I would say I would ask this question on my interviews. About 50% of them were coming back to Canada. About 50% of them were staying in the US. So coming back to Canada after residency for family medicine in the States is very, very easy to do. And Winston, thank you for the congratulations. I appreciate it. Thank you so much. And I think I answered about moving back to Canada. It's a possibility, but we'll see. And what would you recommend for future students? How is the match for internal medicine or EM? So what would I recommend for future students? That's kind of a very broad question. So I guess the takeaways for advice for me in basic sciences when you're going down there, as I said, it's a lot of information. You can expect like a big course load, right? So for future students, hit the ground running when you get there. Come up with a study plan and how you're going to sort of address those classes right off the bat. That's what I did. So I would sit down with my planner and I had like what my days looked like, what my weeks looked like. And I would schedule sort of my study goals and I stuck to those throughout the process. And so that was a big thing for me because then you don't fall behind. My other thing was do it right the first time, like really study well and learn that information well the first time, because you really won't have the time later to try and learn it for step one. And I saw people try and do that where they'd be like, well, I'll learn this later when I need to for step one. That I wouldn't recommend. Learn it well the first time because when you come back to it in fifth, it makes it so much easier. You're going to be like, oh yeah, I remember this. And it's already there in your brain. The other thing for being on the island and for studying, like I said, when I was kind of chatting about my experience, pick resources that work for you and stick to them. There were a lot of people sometimes that would be like, oh, I'll try this. And then they try that. And then they try that. And then that's where they got lost. For me, I had resources that I liked and they worked and I just stuck with them. So like when I was studying in fifth semester for some of my shelf exams, like for physiology, BRS physiology textbook was like perfect for me. That's what I used when I was studying physiology back through the semesters. That's what I used for that shelf exam. That's what I used when I went on to do step one. And it just keeps it consistent and you'll learn it very, very well that way. So whatever works for you, like some people it was first aid, some people it was doctors in training. There's different resources and for whatever works for you, just stick with it and use it. And then for step one, UWorld is your holy grail. Do as many questions as you can and do them over and over and over again. I wish I had started doing that earlier than I did for step one. So it's perfect for step one and even for step two. It's a very important resource to use moving forward. The other advice I have for students really is just take each step as it comes at that time. There's a lot you guys are going to be stressed about. There's a lot that you're going to be trying to think about. And it's too much to kind of try and think about all at once. So take each step as it comes. So when you're on the island and you're doing those classes, focus on the classes, do well, and then learn the material well. When it comes time for you to do your step one, do focus and study and do your step one. Then worry about your cores and do each core as you go. Worry about electives when it comes time to worry about electives and worry about the match when it's time to worry about the match. But take each step as it comes and sort of focus that way. And how is the match for internal medicine or emergency medicine? So for internal medicine, we had a lot of people match. I think the biggest sort of specialties for us always are family medicine and internal medicine. We had a ton of people matched to internal medicine. So from what I understand, it was a huge success this year for Saba graduates. For emergency medicine, there was 2 Saba graduates this year, I believe, that matched into emergency medicine programs. The caveat for emergency medicine, because I'm Canadian, if you are Canadian and looking to apply for emergency medicine, it's a little bit more complicated because if you want to come back to Canada, Canada doesn't recognize the emergency. You only can apply for emergency medicine residencies in the States that are 4 years long because Canada requires it to be a 4-year residency program. So if you are Canadian, you're looking to come back for emergency medicine, you have to apply to the 4-year programs, and most of the programs in the U.S. are 3 years. But as far as I know, if you're looking at internal medicine, super successful. Saba has a lot of success there and has great relationships with a lot of hospitals. So that IM is right up Saba's alley. Emergency medicine, we don't seem to have as much interest as far as Saba students go in emergency medicine, but those that did matched this year, it seems we had 2 that did match into it. So there is success there. And does Saba still have a USMLE course built into the basic sciences? I believe so. When I was there, 5th semester was all Kaplan course. So we did 5th semester, you kind of have 1 month of new material. And then the next months are all just the Kaplan review course for the USMLE step 1. So your 5th semester will be pretty much focused solely on studying for your step 1 exam, which is why I say The prep that you do on the island for step one is a ton of studying, and it's more than enough to prepare you for that. So don't overthink it. Once you pass your exit exam and you're coming back and you're writing your step one, just write your step one, because honestly, you're more than well prepared for it, and there's no reason to delay it. So I don't know if there's any more questions. I'll hang out for a few more minutes just in case, or if I didn't answer a question exactly how you were hoping I would answer it, feel free to like toss up more specifics around something, and I'll do my best to kind of answer the question that you really want answered. But yeah, so that's it. That's pretty much me, and you guys will be great at Saba. This is what you really want to do, then Saba will get you there, because I'm exactly where I wanted to be. And just try and enjoy parts of the process as you can, because I know it gets stressful, but I want you all to know that it's possible. So I'm going to sign off now and say goodbye. I hope you're all well, and good luck. Okay.